Now, of course, we will be taking you to our SABC studios in a moment, where our reporter Mahlako Komane is standing by. Of course, it's a very important evening this tonight for many matriculants for the class of 2021. Of course, everybody watching those results very closely, wanting to see just how well this class did. Well, let's take you here now. The Congress of South African Students, COSAS, says the school curriculum needs to be changed to ensure that township and rural learners get quality education. Now, COSAS says the quality of education should not be determined by where learners go to school. This comes as many learners continue to struggle to access better education closer to where they live. Many are flocking to suburban schools to seek placement and quality education. Now, let's explore this and other education-related matters a bit further. We are now joined via Zoom by Professor Sarah Gravett from the Faculty of Education at the University of Johannesburg. Professor, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Sure.
Prof, I mean, it's around this time that the quality of education system, particularly in township and rural areas, comes under scrutiny. Should we be worried about, first of all, the state of affairs as it relates to the state of education, of our education system? I mean, some have gone as far as saying that the education system is broken.
Yes, this is indeed the time that we scrutinize education each year. Personally, I think we are doing too much this time of the year, when we are focusing on matric results and not sufficiently at other times of the year. Of course, the pandemic of the last 2 years has also contributed significantly to many of the issues that we have in education at the moment. However, having said this, for sure, there are aspects in our education system that require specific attention, also in relation to the curriculum. A gift of the pandemic, if there is such a thing, is that it placed the focus specifically on what the core should be in the curriculum that we should be teaching our children. And we are hoping that the learnings that we have at the moment will form the basis for rethinking aspects of the curriculum going forward. If I could then briefly comment on what was said by these young people, without a doubt, I think the system that the DBE wants to introduce, to have more than one stream of education within the education system, a stream that is more vocational, 2 streams actually, that would be more vocational, would address many of these concerns. But this is going to take a while to implement. But in the meantime, as I also said, the curriculum as such should be rethought in certain aspects.
What are your expectations as we lead up to those all-important announcement results by the Basic Education Department this evening?
Well, I would be surprised if there is any increase in the numbers of matrics with many distinctions, etc. It has been a very, very difficult time in education in the last 2 years. And unfortunately, as is always the case, those schools that are well-resourced, that are in more affluent communities where there is free access, or let me put it this way, where the people have access to internet, where there's data is not an issue. In those schools, the children were able to continue with their education basically uninterrupted, even though, of course, it was challenging for everybody involved. The difficulty is our schools, the rural schools specifically, and other schools also, where the children did not have the same access to resources than those in the more affluent schools. And it is a tragedy that they will be impacted quite negatively. I know a lot has been done to try and support these matrics by the Department of Basic Education, but it is the case that they will be suffering more than those that come from schools where they have the number of all the teachers available that could put in the extra time with these children and all the resources that I mentioned.
Do you think that, the pandemic itself, COVID-19, is, to blame wholeheartedly here? Because, we know that there were certain plans that were in place or should have been in place by the Basic Department of Education. Even in 2020, we know that they released a report, its action plan report in 2020 that would have led them to 2024. Even President Cyril Ramaphosa at the time, coming to the fray and saying this would be linked to some sort of performance agreements with his cabinet. But it doesn't seem that we've seen any of those, implementations that were promised by the department in 2020 being implemented, which is probably why in my intro, when I read that the Congress of South African Students is now calling for an overhaul of the school curriculum.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. I don't think we can blame the pandemics as the only reason. For sure, some of the plans that have been in the making for a while have not been implemented, and one should try to understand why this is the case. Having said this, it takes usually some momentum to get things off the ground, and the momentum, I think, was stopped due to the pandemic. So one should be critical because plans often stay plans. We are very good with making good plans, but not always good with implementing those plans. But we should also take into consideration that during the last 2 years, the focus was basically, I think, for us all on survival, on doing the best we can under very difficult circumstances. Having said this, as I said, there are some lessons that we learned, and we are hoping that these lessons would be helpful to inform education going forward.
One of those very important lessons one would think that the Department of Basic Education would learn is just the inequality. A lot of people have raised this. The pandemic probably showed it more prevalently this time around, showing in most cases that only those that are privileged, were even improved during this time, whilst those, particularly in your rural areas, suffered the most. What more can be done? Even as we opened the school for 2022 academic year, we saw already that basic things were not done, including, basic rights to education, by the lack of placement of students or learners in most provinces. Even the Western Cape saying that they are having difficulties in placing students, for the 2022 academic year.
Specifically with regard to placing students, this is a challenge, and I think it's particularly a challenge in the urban areas, because we have more and more people from the rural areas moving to the urban areas, trying to find a better life there. And this is providing huge challenges for education in these urban areas. But having said this again, as I said before, the issue is that not that we lack policy, not that we lack good plans, but often the issue lies with implementation. And we need to understand why this is the case. Why is there a lack of sufficient leadership and sufficient capacity to implement those plans that are being made?
Prof, in the beginning of our conversation, one of the questions I asked you is that, is this particular sector in our country, and that's education, in a crisis, essentially? Because, if you look at some of the issues that we speak about throughout the year, education doesn't really feature in those in those issues now at the moment when, the schools are, opening and the Matric results are yet again to be released. We now focus on fundamentals. And some of those fundamentals speak to infrastructure challenges, the issue of, just safety concerns when we talk about pit latrines. What can be done in this country to make sure that the education agenda is something that is in our daily life?
Absolutely, and this is why I said to you before, even though I make myself available during this time of the year to also talk about these issues when it's the Matric results that are being announced, I find it problematic that this is the time that we focus on these things, and once the hoo-ha is over, then these things fall off our agenda. The fact is also, as we've said many times before, that, and there I agree with our Minister of Education, that education is a societal issue. It's not only an issue for the Department of Basic Education. But this means that we really need involved parents. We really need them also to support the education system and to be vocal about what is required for the education system to provide the best education for their children. We need very good leadership in schools, and we've seen this many times before, that you could have schools in the same area, and some of those schools are doing very well and supporting children very well, maybe despite difficulties in terms of resources, but you would have another school in the same area not do it. And if you look at that, you will see often it relates to the leadership. And then it is the support that should be given to schools by district officers in the departments of education. And regrettably here we find that many of those who are supposed to be giving the support to schools in districts are not sufficiently capacitated to do that. So those who need to provide the leadership are not able to provide the leadership in all cases. That is very worrying.
Professor Sarah Gravett from the Faculty of Education at the University of Johannesburg, thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Prof.
Thank you.